Adventure Time is one of my favorite shows, and since it recently ended, I wanted to start a series of videos where I review every season going over every episode. These are going to be my mega reviews. I'm not going to do a super in-depth analysis of each episode, rather I'm just going to go over what I like and point out what I think is interesting in each one. After going over every episode, I'm going to talk about the DVD/Blu-ray and what kind of special features are on it. I'm starting with Season 1 of course, so I'll be going over the first 26 episodes of the series. I have a lot of nostalgia for Season 1 since it was my first exposure to Adventure Time other than the pilot. It was a cartoon I was really excited for and it delivered tenfold over the years. Now let's start going over the episodes, starting with Episode 1, Slumber Party Panic. This introduces a lot of the main cast with Finn, Princess Bubblegum, and Jake, and a little bit of Lady. But it also shows a lot of the minor characters with the candy people. There's Starchy, Mr. Cupcake, and even Root Beer Guy is here. Manfred's here too.
I know what you are, Manfred.
This episode does a good job establishing the humor in the show and showing what we can expect. PB is wearing a lab coat in the first episode, so we know she deals with science a lot. The weird thing about this episode, though, is the end. The Gumball Guardians freeze time and Finn has to answer a math question. It seems like PB has no control over them, but maybe she was just testing Finn? Or maybe they were just being a lot sillier in the early seasons with that sort of stuff. There's already hints at some kind of relationship between Finn and PB, but we're not quite sure yet. Rewatching the first season, I also kind of miss Finn's prepubescent voice cracks. They also get a lot more experimental with the facial expressions compared to later seasons. Episode 2, Trouble in Lumpy Space. This episode introduces Lumpy Space Princess. There's a lot of really great jokes and expressions in this one. I love how Finn's solution in the beginning is just to sock the lumps out of Jake, resorting to punching away the problem, which he does a lot in the early seasons. He continually gets frustrated throughout the episode where at one point he just says he'll kill Lumpy Space. LSP has a lot of great lines in this episode. One that I can't believe I didn't catch before is when she's calling her friend Melissa, she tells her phone, "Call BFF 66. So she's had 65 other BFFs? That's so like LSP. Episode 3, Prisoners of Love. This is Ice King's introduction. The beginning of the episode feels very similar to the beginning of the pilot. It really shows what a dork he is when he orders the snow minions to go beat up Finn and Jake. We get to see a lot more of the princesses after they're captured, including one emerald princess that we don't really see a lot of in the entire show. When Finn uses his flute and Jake explains why it broke, it really makes it feel like they've been on a lot of adventures prior to the beginning of the show. Like, when I first saw this episode, I thought I missed one because of what Jake said. Finn has some great mad faces here with his crazy eyebrows. The Cosmic Owl is also introduced, though it's a very small appearance. Also, fun fact, he's voiced by Jeremy Shada here. Episode 4, Tree Trunks. Appropriate title since this is the introduction to Tree Trunks, though she did appear in the first episode. Finn and Jake are playing with swords in the beginning of the episode, and it's one of the only times we see Jake using his sword. I don't think he actually uses it again if I remember correctly. We start to see a bit more of the D&D influence with this quest through a dark forest with weird monsters. One quote from Jake that I think is hilarious is when he says,
"Finn can handle it, he's 12.
Such a good role model, just letting Finn do dangerous stuff. This episode has one of the funniest endings of the season, with Tree Trunks just exploding. She's actually fine though. Episode 5, The Enchiridion. Here we have the first episode that entered production in the series, and also what was actually meant to be the first episode. After rewatching it, I can kind of see it. We get into a little more of the lore of the show, though it's not really explored much, just mentioned with the Enchiridion. The episode begins with the Candy Kingdom partying, and
I know who you are, Punchy.
Finn is set on a quest to obtain the Enchiridion. He can't resist helping people throughout the trials, and that ties in a bit with another episode later. We get some more D&D stuff with alignments. The Mark Hamill character tries to force Finn to slay an unaligned ant. There's also screaming at the very last 2 seconds of this episode for some reason. It's really weird. Episode 6, The Jiggler. This is an episode that I'm not really too keen on for some reason. Maybe it's because it seemed like it was one of those episodes that was always on when there were reruns. The episode starts out with Finn and Jake saving some fruit, and Finn singing an auto-tuned song, saying that he swallowed a tiny computer. Again, it makes it feel like they've been doing these adventures for a while. They take the Jiggler home, and it ends up getting real messed up. Basically, moral of the story is, don't take in wild animals as pets. Episode 7, Ricardio the Heart Guy. Here we have a celebrity voice character with Ricardio voiced by George Takei. Though there have been others before and many more afterwards, like I mentioned with Mark Hamill, he'll come back again soon. Ricardio is actually the Ice King's heart that wants to make out with Princess Bubblegum's heart. I don't really have too much to say about this episode. It's fine, it's just that I don't really have a lot to say. We do get to see Finn's growing crush on PB, and he has the great line of,
I'm not jealous! I'm weird!
Episode 8, Business Time. We get to see a little more evidence of the past with the icebergs that surface. The businessmen take over Finn and Jake's adventuring, and eventually they have to stop them. I love how Finn says that he feels more adequate, as if that's the best adjective he could use. Finn and Jake are playing BMO a lot in this episode, though he hasn't had a speaking role yet. By the end of the episode, Finn and Jake are fat, but Jake can stretch back to normal, while Finn just stays fat, and that's the end. I just find that hilarious. Episode 9, My Two Favorite People. Here's Lady Rainicorn's official introduction as Jake's girlfriend. Oh, and Shelby is also here. I like the premise behind this episode quite a bit. Hanging out with both your best friend and your girlfriend is sometimes hard to make work. Jake gets jealous of Finn and Lady having fun together, so he calls up Tiffany as a new best friend. I love that when Finn and Tiffany fight, Finn shouts out,
Homewrecker!
This episode also has one of my favorite ending lines being,
Let's always be stupid. Forever!
Episode 10, Memories of Boom Boom Mountain. This is another one of those episodes I saw a lot on reruns, though I still enjoy it. We get the origin of why Finn is always willing to help, and we get to see Joshua and Margaret in a flashback. One of the Marauders mentions that Finn is good for a human boy, so I'm guessing they may have encountered humans a long time ago, or maybe they were humans. Finn keeps trying to help in this episode, but everything doesn't work as well as it should. Eventually, a solution is found to everyone's problems, and we end with one of my favorite endings of the show with a dolphin falling in love with Jake. As Finn said, that's the opposite of a problem. Episode 11, Wizard. This is a pretty fun episode. Finn and Jake get to become magic users, at least for a little bit. In order to get their first magic skill, they have to do an insanely difficult task of eating a broom. I love Jake's line here of,
Woo, yeah! Force that enthusiasm!
Eventually we learn that by earning every last star on the robe, that Finn has to take the place of an elder helping keep an asteroid at bay. Finn doesn't want to do that though, and tries to move the temple out of the way. Outside we see that Bufo is actually about to bury the elder. Another quote here I love is from Bufo.
Good idea. Glad I thought of it.
This episode also has another hilarious ending coming full circle to the beginning as Jake exclaims. Episode 12, Evicted. This is Marceline's introduction. In the beginning of this episode, we see Finn on his bed and he actually throws the Enchiridion at a worm. Nice bit of continuity. Marceline in this episode seems to be a bit more of a bully to the two than an ally. There's the house hunting song in this episode, and it's one of the very few songs that isn't sung by the characters, other than a little bit by Marceline. Finn and Jake have to find a new home since Marceline evicted them, and eventually they find a cave and end up having a party where... Wait, Tree Trunks is here. Isn't she supposed to be in the Crystal Dimension? Maybe the episodes aren't really in chronological order, or they didn't really care that much about continuity at this point in the series. Ironic, given what I said about the Enchiridion earlier. Also, when Finn and Jake are running back to the treehouse, there are banners over the Ice Kingdom and the mountains in the background. That's the first time I noticed it while rewatching this episode. Episode 13, City of Thieves. For some reason, I forget that this episode exists a lot. Maybe it's because in general, it's very dark a lot of the time in the city. I don't know. It has like muted colors, I guess. We see Finn's determination to do good and not turn into a thief. Eventually, he's tricked into stealing. This is another episode that I don't really have a lot to say about, though I do like the line that Finn has of,
Don't touch me! I'm impure, man!
Episode 14, The Witch's Garden. This episode starts off with Finn and Jake following a frog, which actually becomes part of a series of shorts later with frog seasons. The witch, a one-off character that I think is hilarious, is in this episode, and I'm sad that she never came back later. Once Jake's body is turned into a man baby, he notices that he used to have 8 more nipples. Jake tries to remember how he got his stretchy powers, but of course we know now that he's had them since birth, so no wonder he can't remember. This episode highlights just how lazy Jake is without his powers, and that he doesn't really learn his lesson either. That somehow makes him endearing and a really fun character. Episode 15, What is Life? This is Nepter's introduction, and birth. We see that Finn and Jake like pranking each other, but Jake always has the upper hand. So Finn wants to create something that will prank Jake good. He somehow creates a robot that comes alive with lightning striking it, but needs more power to be fully functional. One line that the Ice King has in this episode is when he's surprised to see Finn in his home. He says,
Finn? Ugh, why can't you ever be a princess?
That leads me to believe that that might have been where he got his idea for Fiona and Cake. What a weirdo. I also love the balloons in this episode, especially the line,
Yay! To the
Episode 16, Ocean of Fear. This episode starts with a quote from Pat McHale and ends with another. Pat McHale created Over the Garden Wall for those of you that don't know. He's really good friends with Pendleton Ward. We are introduced to Finn's phobia of the ocean here, and again we get a character voiced by Mark Hamill with a Fear Feaster. This episode also has one of the most foldy Finn faces ever when a drop of the ocean hits his face. We get a lot more evidence of Ooh being in a post-apocalypse with all the remains we see underwater. There's still a lot of evidence in other episodes this season, but not quite as obvious as this. Jake also has a pretty terrible way of trying to get Finn to face his fear, but it's a pretty fun episode overall. Episode 17, When Wedding Bells Thaw. Ice King has found a princess that actually wants to marry him, but not really. He wants Finn and Jake to throw a Man Lorette party for him. Eventually, he doesn't want to marry anymore, and Finn and Jake try to convince him. They see these stinky old swans where one eats the other one. Finn and Jake are so disturbed by it while the Ice King has a revelation. They eventually go to the Ice Kingdom to have a ritual for the wedding, which is weird because every Ice Kingdom law is because of the Ice King, not anyone else. So he's just making all of this up, which makes it even funnier. The princess here is one that I don't think we see ever again. They trick the Ice King into marrying Jake instead, which Jake is laughing about at first but then realizes he shouldn't be laughing. They actually reference this in a much later season. Episode 18, Dungeon. This is another very D&D-like episode with all the monsters and junk throughout it. Finn bets Jake that he can do the dungeon without him within 11 minutes, having a bit of a meta joke there, which recurs later in the episode when Jake says they have a couple minutes left. There's a lot of really fun stuff in here with everything Finn encounters, especially the demon cat that has approximate knowledge of many things. Episode 19, The Duke. I don't think we see the Duke of Nuts until, like, the finale. Wait. Never mind, he actually appears again in Henchmen, a few episodes from this one. Finn accidentally turns PB green and partially hairless for a bit. We get to see a bit of PB's crazy side as she touts Finn as her flawless champion. The squirrel in this episode is pretty hilarious, even though appearances are brief. The line near the end when PB says, "Maybe there is," with Finn and Jake walking away, I always thought it was really funny with them saying,
Hey!
What? You said maybe.
Episode 20, Freak City. We get Magic Man's introduction. Finn decides to help what he sees as an old beggar, but is actually Magic Man. I think it's pretty appropriate that the first thing he does is turn a bird inside out. It shows what kind of madman he is. Finn gets turned into a foot, so he's determined to find Magic Man to get his body back. Jake is weirdly into Finn being a foot, and it turns out he always secretly wanted to be a foot. I'm guessing Jake has an oddly specific foot fetish. Finn meets up with some other people that were turned into body parts. 2 of them were turned into tonsils. Yeah, sure. Finn has another little auto-tune song like he had in the beginning of The Jiggler, a nice little bit of continuity. And Finn and Jake learned that Magic Man is just a jerk. Episode 21, Donnie. This episode focuses on a grass ogre named Donnie that keeps beating up these house people. Finn wants him to stop doing it, so Finn and Jake help him to be less obnoxious. Though it turns out that being obnoxious is what keeps the Y-Wolves away from eating the house people. The Y-Wolves explain to Finn that their population will skyrocket until they're all devoured by the Cosmic Owl. I'm guessing the Cosmic Owl didn't really have a set role yet, so the writers just put him in whatever. B-Mo gets his first words in this episode, ironically saying that he's incapable of emotion when Mo created him to understand fun. This isn't exactly in the higher end of episodes for the season, but it's fun enough. Episode 22, Henchmen. This is the only other Marceline episode in this season, and it's a really fun one. Marceline is still acting like a bully towards Finn, though a bit more manipulative, like he's a plaything to her. We get to hear Marceline singing a bit more in this episode, though not a full song. Jake isn't a part of the adventure because he's still afraid of Marceline, so it's just Finn. Marceline keeps tricking Finn into thinking she's going to be doing something terrible, when in reality she's really not that bad. I think it's the best Marceline episode this season, though that's not saying much because there's only 2. Episode 23, Rainy Day Daydream. This is a weird episode, though that's relative because we're talking about Adventure Time here. The basic premise is Jake's imagination goes out of control while there's a knife storm going on outside. Finn thinks imagination is, quote,
Imagination is for turbo nerds who can't handle how kick-butt reality is.
Somehow Jake's imagination comes true and affects things in the real world. Which, now that I think about it, isn't the point of imagination that it doesn't affect reality? Anyway, B-Mo gets a few more lines in this episode, and that's all he gets for the entire season. One thing that I do like about this episode is that we explore the treehouse a lot more, and we see rooms that we don't usually see. Episode 24, What Have You Done? This is one of my favorite episodes of the season. Ice King is captured by Finn and Jake by order of Princess Bubblegum. Finn and Jake don't know what the Ice King did, but do what PB says anyway. The whole scene with Ice King in the dungeon with Finn and Jake is hilarious. There are so many great jokes.
These bars can't hold me forever! Hey, there's only like 2 of them. Behold the 2 jerks!
The jerks is us? Nux.
Oh, slaps in disgust, eh? Ooh, let's call them Slappy D's.
Ice King mentions that he made the crown, but we know he's crazy, so he's probably lying. Or it's some weird memory of Evergreen. Choose your excuse. There's also one of the greatest bubblegum faces in this episode. She also speaks a bit of her German and flips a table like 3 times. There's a little Easter egg with some numbers that spell out boobies upside down like on a calculator. And of course, one of my favorite lines.
Starch is feeling healthy again. A bit too healthy if you ask me.
Episode 25, His Hero. We get Billy's introduction in this episode, and we also see the Lich for a brief moment. The song for Billy is pretty funny. The line, "Also he fight a bear," is something I would quote a lot when this was new. Finn and Jake fanboy over Billy quite a bit. Jake even says he has a secret crush on him. The whole episode is about pacifism and how it doesn't always work. The famous quote from Jake is from this episode.
Dude, sucking at something is the first step towards being sorta good at something.
I've seen people that haven't even watched Adventure Time use that quote. The episode feels like it should be a bookender to the season, which I think it was originally intended to be, but we still got one more episode left. Episode 26, Gut Grinder. This episode doesn't feel like a finale, but it's still a fun episode. Finn and Jake go to these villages where a monster called the Gut Grinder keeps coming by to eat all their gold. The first village has these soft people, and I think one of them says kawaii at one point. Kawaii! The evidence starts pointing to Jake being the Gut Grinder, and Jake himself starts believing it. So much so, where at one point he goes crazy, and there's a very hilarious line from Finn.
You never turn into a monster when I want you to. It's always, not now, Finn. I have a headache.
Eventually we find out that it's the Spiky People's mayor's wife that is the Gut Grinder, dressed up like Jake because she thinks he's hot. So there's a lot of funny lines in this episode, but I don't think it's finale worthy. Alright, before going into what I thought of the season overall, let's look into some of the special features of the DVD. We have commentaries on Trouble in Lumpy Space, Prisoners of Love, Tree Trunks, and Ricardio the Heart Guy. Both Trouble in Lumpy Space and Prisoners of Love have Pendleton Ward, Tom Kenny, John DiMaggio, and Jeremy Shada doing commentary. Tree Trunks has Polly Livingston and Ward's mother as commentary. And Ricardio the Heart Guy has Ward, Kenny, Shada, Hendon Walsh, and special guest George Takei. The commentaries aren't too insightful, other than a few things Pendleton Ward points out, and there is a bit of dead air sometimes. I think the one for Tree Trunks is probably the most interesting, because it's Pendleton's mother and Polly talking about him growing up. There's a little behind-the-scenes featurette that is very different because it's just Penn casually filming on his phone, but then he ends up chasing a tiny Finn around the office with some crazy stuff happening along the way. Then there's a behind-the-scenes of the behind-the-scenes where we see Thurup Van Orman in a green screen suit. There's animatics for the Enchiridion, Rainy Day Daydream, Slumber Party Panic, and Dungeon, so you can watch those if you're into animatics. There's a music video of a kid dressing up as Finn, and then there's a bunch of people in costumes of characters in the show. And there's also another music video with Finn Demonium, showing off a bunch of cosplay and fan art. Then lastly, there's a 2-minute short with the wand. It's nothing too special, just Finn and Jake with a bit of Ice King. So not a whole lot in terms of special features, but still worth looking at. So, Season 1 is definitely a lot more episodic than any other season. Every episode is focused on Finn and Jake, or just Finn, with minor roles from other characters. It's the most inconsistent with continuity and how Powers and the Land of Ooh works. That's to be expected though, since it's the first season, and the creators are getting a feel for how the show should flow. Even though this season is very episodic, it's still very much worth watching. A lot of the episodes have some really funny gags, and lines that I still quote to this day. As far as favorites from the season, here's 5 episodes. The Enchiridion, Dungeon, Henchman, What Have You Done, and His Hero. Those are just my first instinct to choose after rewatching the first season and looking over the episode list. So if I didn't choose one of your favorites, it doesn't mean I don't like it. There's still a lot I enjoy in this season. So that's it for my first mega review of Adventure Time. Let me know what you thought of Season 1 of Adventure Time, and I'll see you next time with Season 2. Bye! Thank you so much for watching this video. This is something I've been wanting to make since I got back into Adventure Time last year. I only just now got around to making it, so it means a lot to me that you watched through the whole thing. If you liked the video, I would really appreciate it if you gave it a like and subscribed. And I'd like to thank my patrons so much for supporting me. Again, thank you, and I'll see you in the next one.